The dust swirled in the early morning light as Nora Hamilton stepped onto the porch of her father's modest home for what she believed would be the last time. The year was 1879, and Moab, Utah was still little more than a settlement clinging to existence in the harsh desert landscape. She clutched a worn leather valise in one hand and a ticket in the other, a one-way passage to a new life in San Francisco, away from the heartache and broken dreams that had plagued her for the past year. Nora was 22, with honey-brown hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and eyes the color of the sage that dotted the surrounding desert. She wore her best traveling dress forest green with a modest bustle and had pinned her hair neatly beneath a matching bonnet. Her mother's locket hung at her throat, containing a faded portrait of the woman who had passed 5 years prior, leaving Nora to care for her father until his own death just months ago. "Miss Hamilton, your carriage has arrived," called Mr. Peterson, the local livery owner who had agreed to drive her to the Stagecoach depot on the edge of town. "Thank you," she replied, taking one last look at the small home where she had spent her entire life. The worn wooden beams, the porch swing her father had built, the garden now withering in the summer heat, it was all she had ever known. But there was nothing left for her here now, not since her father had died and the bank had foreclosed on their struggling ranch. The ride to the depot was quiet, with Mr. Peterson occasionally commenting on the weather or local gossip. Nora barely heard him, her thoughts drifting to what awaited her in California. Her father's cousin had written after his passing, offering her a position as a companion to her elderly aunt. It wasn't ideal, but it was respectable work for a single woman with few options. As they approached the depot, Nora spotted the large stagecoach being readied for its journey west. Several passengers milled about, preparing to board. The stage would take her to Green River, where she would catch the train that would eventually deliver her to San Francisco. "Here we are, Miss Hamilton," Mr. Peterson said, helping her down from the carriage. "May fortune smile upon you in California." "Thank you for everything," Nora replied, handing him a few coins from her meager savings. She squared her shoulders and walked toward the depot office to confirm her passage. The depot was a simple wooden structure with a single window where a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose examined her ticket. "Stage leaves in 30 minutes, Miss Hamilton," he informed her. "You can wait on the bench outside if you'd like." Nora nodded and made her way back outside, finding a spot on a weather-beaten bench. She watched as the stagecoach driver secured luggage to the roof of the vehicle while his assistant tended to the 6-horse team. First time traveling alone, the voice startled her. She turned to find a woman in her 30s, dressed in a practical traveling suit of navy blue, smiling kindly at her. "Is it that obvious?" Nora asked. "Only a little," the woman replied with a gentle laugh. "I'm Martha Wilson. My husband and I are headed to Sacramento." "He's over there speaking with the driver." She gestured toward a portly man with a thick mustache. "Nora Hamilton, I'm going to San Francisco. How wonderful. Do you have family there?" Nora hesitated. "Not exactly. I'm to be a companion to an elderly woman. My father's cousin arranged it." Martha's expression softened with understanding. "I see. Well, the journey will be long, but at least we'll have company along the way." As they talked, Nora became aware of a commotion in the distance. Squinting against the morning sun, she could make out a rider approaching rapidly, a cloud of dust in his wake. The horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, was being pushed hard, its powerful legs eating up the distance between the rider and the depot. The man astride the horse came into clearer view, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered cowboy hat pulled low over his face. His blue shirt was dark with sweat, and as he drew closer, Nora could see the determination etched on his features. The depot manager stepped out, shading his eyes with one hand. "Look at that fool riding like the devil himself is after him." The cowboy reined his horse to an abrupt halt just yards from the stagecoach, causing several onlookers to step back in alarm. The stallion snorted and pawed at the ground as the man swung down from the saddle in one fluid motion. He removed his hat, revealing a shock of dark hair and eyes that searched the small crowd with intensity. When those eyes found Nora, something flickered in their depths: recognition, relief, and something else she couldn't name. "Nora," he called, his voice carrying across the space between them. "Thank God I caught you." A gasp escaped her lips as she realized who it was. Ross Whitaker. He crossed the distance between them in long strides, stopping just short of where she sat frozen on the bench. Martha Wilson had discreetly moved away, sensing the private nature of whatever was unfolding. "What are you doing here?" Nora asked, rising to her feet, her heart pounding against her ribs. Ross Whitaker had been the foreman of the neighboring ranch, a man she had known her entire life, a man she had once thought she might marry before everything had fallen apart. "I couldn't let you leave," he said, his voice low and urgent, "not without saying what I should have said a year ago." Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks as she became aware of the curious stares from the other passengers. "Ross, this isn't the time or place." "When is the time, Nora?" He interrupted, his expression earnest. "You're about to leave on that stagecoach, and I might never see you again." The depot manager cleared his throat loudly. "5 minutes until departure, folks. Please begin boarding." Passengers started moving toward the stagecoach, but Nora remained rooted in place, her eyes locked with Ross's. "I know I hurt you," he continued, lowering his voice. "After your father lost the ranch and mine sent me to Colorado for that cattle drive that lasted months. I should have come back sooner. You left without a proper goodbye," Nora replied, her voice barely above a whisper, "and when you returned, you hardly spoke to me." "I was a coward," Ross admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I thought you deserved better than a simple ranch hand with nothing to offer. But then I heard you were leaving for good, and I couldn't bear the thought of a world where you weren't just across the valley." The stagecoach driver called out, "All aboard, we leave in 2 minutes." Martha Wilson, now standing near the coach door, gave Nora a questioning look, silently asking if she was coming. "I have to go, Ross," Nora said, though her feet felt leaden. "There's nothing left for me here." "There's me," he said simply, "if you'll have me." Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. "I bought your father's ranch, Nora, with money I saved from 3 years of cattle drives and a loan from the bank. I know it's not much yet, but I plan to rebuild it, make it thrive again." Nora stared at the paper he held out to her, stunned. "You bought our ranch. Why would you do that?" "Because it was your home. Because I hoped that one day, if I could make something of myself, I might ask you to share it with me." His voice grew softer. "I love you, Nora. I think I have since we were children, catching frogs by the creek. I was too stubborn and proud to admit it before, but I'm done letting pride stand in the way of happiness." The stagecoach driver had climbed to his seat, reins in hand. "Final call, miss. Are you coming or staying?" Nora looked from Ross to the stagecoach and back again, her mind racing. The safe, certain path lay in that stagecoach, a respectable position in a grand city far from the pain of the past year. But standing before her was a different future, uncertain and challenging, but with the man she had never truly stopped loving. "Miss Hamilton," the driver called again, impatience creeping into his tone. Martha Wilson had boarded, but she leaned out of the window, a knowing smile on her face. "Sometimes, dear, the hardest choices are the ones most worth making." Ross took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Stay, Nora, please stay with me. Let me prove that I can be the man you deserve." In that moment, with the morning sun warming her face and the distant mountains standing witness, Nora Hamilton made the decision that would change the course of her life forever. "I'm staying," she called to the driver, her voice stronger than she expected. Then more softly to Ross, "I'm staying." The relief and joy that transformed his face made her heart soar. He reached for her hand, his touch tentative as if she might change her mind. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering with words, Nora took a step forward and placed her free hand against his cheek. "I've never been more certain of anything." As the stagecoach lurched into motion, beginning its journey without her, Ross Whitaker pulled Nora gently into his arms. Around them, the few remaining onlookers, the depot manager, Mr. Peterson, and several townspeople who had gathered to watch the departure exchanged smiles and knowing glances. "Welcome home, Nora Hamilton," Ross whispered against her hair. And for the first time in a year, Moab felt like home again. The ride back to town was different from the somber journey Nora had made that morning. This time, she rode beside Ross on his chestnut stallion, Ember, her valise tied securely behind the saddle. The horse moved at a gentle walk, as if understanding the precious cargo he carried. "I can't believe you bought my father's ranch," Nora said as they passed the town's general store, drawing curious glances from those who had expected to see her on the morning stage. "When did this happen?" "3 weeks ago," Ross replied, his voice rumbling against her back. "I'd been saving for years, hoping to have my own spread one day. When I heard the bank was selling your father's place, it seemed like fate. I've been fixing up the house, making it livable again." "But why didn't you tell me?" "I've been staying with Mrs. Abernathy since the foreclosure. You must have known I was planning to leave." Ross was quiet for a moment, the only sound the steady clop of Ember's hooves on the packed dirt road. "I wanted everything to be perfect before I approached you. The house needed work, and I've only just begun to rebuild the herd. Pride, I suppose. I didn't want to offer you less than you deserved." "Oh, Ross," Nora sighed, shaking her head. "All I ever wanted was honesty and a chance to face challenges together." "I'm learning that now," he admitted. "When Mrs. Abernathy mentioned yesterday that you'd be on today's stage, I realized I was about to lose my chance forever. I rode through the night to reach you in time." That explained his exhausted appearance and the state of his horse. Nora felt a surge of tenderness for this proud, stubborn man who had pushed himself to the limit for her sake. "Well, you caught me," she said softly. "But what happens now? I can't simply move into the ranch with you. People would talk." "I've thought of that," Ross said. "Mrs. Abernathy has agreed to chaperone to stay at the ranch until we decide what comes next for us." Nora turned slightly in the saddle to look at him, surprise evident in her expression. "You asked Mrs. Abernathy to be our chaperone. When did you manage that?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Before I rode like a madman to stop you from leaving, I may have been desperate, but I wasn't without a plan." She laughed then, the sound carrying on the breeze. "Ross Whitaker, you continue to surprise me." They rode past the church where she had attended services her entire life, past the schoolhouse where they had both learned their letters, and toward the outskirts of town where the land opened up to ranches and homesteads. "I should tell you," Ross said as they turned onto the familiar road that led to her father's, now his property. "I've made some changes to the place. I hope you'll approve." Nora felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with trepidation. The ranch had been her world for so long, seeing it transformed might be difficult. But as they crested the final hill and the property came into view, her breath caught in her throat. The house, which had fallen into disrepair during her father's illness, now stood proudly with a fresh coat of white paint. The sagging porch had been rebuilt, and she could see new curtains in the windows. The barn had been repaired, and in the corral nearby, several horses grazed peacefully. A small herd of cattle, perhaps 20 head, dotted the nearest pasture. "Ross," she whispered, "it's beautiful." "It's just a beginning," he replied, his voice carrying a note of pride. "I have plans for expanding the herd, maybe adding some sheep. The south pasture has good water rights, and I've been experimenting with different feed crops." As they approached the house, Nora noticed a wagon parked beside it, and the familiar figure of Mrs. Abernathy, a plump, kindly widow in her 60s, arranging something on the front porch. "I see our chaperone has arrived," Ross commented, guiding Ember to the hitching post. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Nora down, his hands strong and steady around her waist. When her feet touched the ground, she didn't immediately step away, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not giving up on me." Before he could respond, Mrs. Abernathy called from the porch, "I see your wild chase was successful, Mr. Whitaker. And Miss Hamilton, how wonderful that you've decided to stay with us after all." Ross reluctantly stepped back, tipping his hat to the older woman. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Mrs. Abernathy." "Nonsense," the widow replied with a wave of her hand. I wouldn't miss this for the world. Now I've brought some lunch and I expect you're both famished, especially you, Mr. Whitaker, after that mad dash to the depot. Nora smiled gratefully at the woman who had provided her shelter after the foreclosure. You're very kind, Mrs. Abernathy. Just doing my Christian duty, the older woman replied with a knowing twinkle in her eye, and ensuring that propriety is maintained, of course. Lunch was a simple affair of cold chicken, biscuits, and apple preserves, served on the newly rebuilt porch that offered a sweeping view of the property. As they ate, Ross outlined his plans for the ranch, his voice animated with enthusiasm. The cattle market is strong right now, he explained. I'm focusing on quality over quantity for the first few years. I've invested in some good breeding stock. What about the orchard? Nora asked, remembering the small grove of apple trees her mother had planted years ago. Is it still there? It is, though it needs attention. I haven't had time to prune properly, but the trees are healthy. I thought perhaps— He hesitated, glancing at her. I thought perhaps you might want to oversee that part of the ranch. Your mother's preserves were famous throughout the territory. Touched that he remembered and had preserved that connection to her mother, Nora nodded. I'd like that very much. Mrs. Abernathy watched their exchange with approval. It seems you two have much to discuss about the future of this ranch. I'll just clear these dishes and let you talk while I prepare the guest room for Miss Hamilton. After she had disappeared into the house, Ross turned to Nora, his expression more serious. I know this is all happening very quickly. If you need time to think about what you want, what I want, Nora interrupted gently, is to understand where we stand, Ross. You asked me to stay, and I have, but what does that mean for us? He reached across the small table between them, taking her hand in his. It means whatever you want it to mean, Nora. I won't pressure you or rush you. Having you here, seeing you bring life back to this place is enough for now. And if I want more? She asked, surprising herself with her boldness. His eyes darkened slightly, and his thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Then I would be the happiest man in Utah territory. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of the wind through the cottonwood trees that lined the creek at the edge of the property. We should talk about practical matters, Nora said eventually. If I'm to stay, I'll need my things from Mrs. Abernathy's house. I'll fetch them tomorrow, Ross offered, and there's the matter of your ticket to San Francisco. Perhaps we can get a refund or at least part of it. I hadn't thought of that, Nora admitted. The ticket had cost nearly all of her savings. That would be helpful. Consider it done. He hesitated, then added, there's one more thing I should mention. I've hired 2 ranch hands to help with the cattle. Good men, brothers from Wyoming. They live in the bunkhouse by the barn. I see, Nora said, understanding his concern. Well, with Mrs. Abernathy here, there should be no issue of propriety, and I've managed ranch hands before when my father was alive. Relief crossed his features. That's what I hoped you'd say. They'll respect you as they would me. I've made that clear. As the afternoon progressed, Ross showed Nora around the property, pointing out the improvements he'd made and the projects still to come. The familiar landscape, once a source of pain as she'd watched it slip away after her father's death, now filled her with a renewed sense of purpose and hope. The apple orchard, as Ross had mentioned, was overgrown but still vigorous. Nora walked among the gnarled trees, remembering how her mother had tended them with loving care. We'll need ladders for pruning, she commented, examining a branch heavy with unripe fruit, and I'll have to see if Mother's preserving kettles are still in the cellar. I found them, Ross said. They're cleaned and ready for use when the apples ripen, and I've ordered new canning jars from the mercantile in town. Nora turned to him, surprised and touched. You thought of everything? He shrugged, a hint of color rising to his tanned cheeks. I wanted you to have something that was yours, something from your family's legacy. Impulsively, she stood on tiptoe and pressed a kiss to his cheek. Thank you, she whispered. The moment hung between them, fragile and full of promise, until the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 2 riders were coming up the road the ranch hands Ross had mentioned, returning from checking the fences on the north pasture. That's Ethan and Will Calloway, Ross explained as they walked back toward the house. "You'll like them. Hard workers, respectful, and will plays a mean fiddle on Saturday nights." The brothers tipped their hats when introduced to Nora, their manner deferential but friendly. Ethan, the elder at 28, had the weathered look of a man who'd spent his life outdoors. Will, younger by 3 years, had an easy smile and quick wit. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Hamilton," Ethan said. "Mr. Whitaker's told us a lot about you." "Has he now?" Nora replied with a sidelong glance at Ross, who suddenly seemed very interested in adjusting his hat. "Said you were the best horsewoman in the county," Will added with a grin. "And that your apple pie could make a man weep with joy," Nora laughed, feeling herself warming to the brothers. "Well, when the apples ripen, you can judge for yourselves." As evening approached, Mrs. Abernathy called them all to supper, a hearty stew she had prepared, with fresh bread from the town bakery. The small dining room that had once hosted only Nora and her father now hummed with conversation and laughter as the unlikely household shared their first meal together. After the Calloway brothers had retired to the bunkhouse and Mrs. Abernathy had excused herself to finish arranging Nora's room, Ross and Nora found themselves alone on the porch once more. The sun was setting, painting the desert landscape in hues of gold and crimson. "Are you happy with your decision?" Ross asked softly, standing beside her at the porch railing. "It's not too late to change your mind. The next stage leaves in 3 days." Nora turned to face him, taking in the features she had known for so long but now saw with new eyes, the strong line of his jaw, the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, the sincerity in his gaze. "I'm not going anywhere, Ross Whitaker," she said firmly. "This is where I belong." He stepped closer, his hand finding hers in the gathering dusk. "I want to do this properly, Nora. Court you as you deserve with Mrs. Abernathy's blessing, take you to church socials and town dances, show everyone in Moab that I'm the luckiest man alive." "I'd like that," she replied, her heart light with happiness. "Though I should warn you, I expect regular visits to that orchard. Someone needs to teach you the proper way to prune an apple tree." His laugh was low and warm. "Yes, madam, I'll be a dutiful student." From within the house, Mrs. Abernathy called, "Miss Hamilton, your room is ready whenever you'd like to retire." "Thank you," Nora called back. Then, to Ross, "I suppose this is good night." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Nora, sweet dreams." As she turned to go inside, he added softly, "I'm glad you stayed." Nora paused in the doorway, looking back at him with a smile that held all the promise of their future. "So am I, Ross, so am I." The next morning dawned clear and bright, with the promise of heat later in the day. Nora woke early, momentarily disoriented by the familiar yet strange surroundings. The bedroom had been hers growing up, but Ross had made changes: a new quilt on the bed, fresh curtains at the window, and a small vase of wildflowers on the dresser. The house came alive with activity as Mrs. Abernathy prepared breakfast, the aroma of coffee and frying bacon filling the air. Ross and the Calloway brothers had already been out since before dawn, tending to the morning chores. Nora dressed in a simple work skirt and blouse, pinning her hair in a practical bun. This was no longer a day for traveling clothes. There was work to be done. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Abernathy greeted her as she entered the kitchen. "Sleep well." "Better than I have in months," Nora admitted, moving to help set the table. "I'd forgotten how quiet it is out here compared to town." "That's the truth," the older woman agreed. "Though I must say, Mr. Whitaker has transformed this place. You should have seen it when he first bought it, broken windows, the porch about to collapse. He's worked like a man possessed to make it right." Nora absorbed this information, adding it to her growing understanding of all Ross had done to create a home worthy of her return. "He's always been hardworking," she said softly. "And devoted," Mrs. Abernathy added with a knowing look. "That man rode through the night to catch you before that stage left, with no guarantee you'd even listen to him. That's not just determination, child. That's love." Before Nora could respond, the back door opened and the men filed in, bringing with them the sense of fresh air and honest work. Ross's face brightened when he saw her, a smile spreading across his features. "Morning," he said, removing his hat. "How'd you sleep, like a child?" Nora replied, returning his smile, "and ready to earn my keep today." Breakfast was a hearty affair, with conversation flowing easily around the table. Plans for the day were discussed: fences to mend, cattle to move to fresh pasture, supplies to purchase in town. Nora insisted on accompanying Ross to retrieve her belongings from Mrs. Abernathy's house and to speak with the Stagecoach company about her ticket. After the meal, while the brothers headed out to begin their tasks, Ross hitched his wagon for the trip to town. Mrs. Abernathy announced her intention to clean the pantry and take inventory of what supplies were needed. "I imagine you two can manage in town without me," she said with a twinkle in her eye. "Just mind your back before supper and remember that folks will be watching." The ride to town was pleasant, with the morning sun warming their shoulders and a light breeze carrying the scent of sage. Ross handled the team with easy confidence, occasionally pointing out changes to the landscape or sharing news about their neighbors. "The Petersons' youngest boy is getting married next month," he mentioned as they passed the turnoff to the Peterson ranch. "They're planning quite a celebration." "Mary Peterson is marrying. Goodness, I still think of her as a child," Nora marveled, realizing how disconnected she had become from community news during her period of grief and uncertainty. "Who's the lucky man?" Jacob Miller, from over by Green River, met her at the county fair last fall. "They say it was love at first sight." Nora glanced at him, curious. "Do you believe in that? Love at first sight?" Ross considered the question, his expression thoughtful. "I believe some people recognize something in each other right away. But I think real love, the kind that lasts, grows from knowing someone deeply, through good times and bad." His answer pleased her, and she nodded in agreement. "Like us, we've known each other since childhood." "Exactly," he said, his voice warming. "I knew you were special the first time you beat me in a horse race when we were 10, but loving you, that came from years of seeing your strength, your kindness, your devotion to your family." The conversation shifted to more practical matters as they reached the outskirts of town. Moab was growing, with new buildings going up along the main street and more traffic than there had been even a year ago. "The railroad's coming," Ross explained as they passed a surveyor marking measurements near the edge of town. "Not all the way to Moab yet, but close enough that they're already planning for the growth it'll bring." Their first stop was the Stagecoach office, where Nora explained her changed circumstances and inquired about a refund for her unused ticket. The clerk, after some consultation with his manager, agreed to refund half the fare, less than she had hoped, but better than nothing. "Consider it a wedding present," the manager said with a wink, clearly assuming the nature of her relationship with Ross. Nora felt herself blush but didn't correct him. Ross, standing beside her, merely tipped his hat in acknowledgement, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Next, they stopped at Mrs. Abernathy's house to collect Nora's belongings. The widow had lived in town since her husband's death 15 years earlier, in a neat cottage with a garden famous for its roses. "It seems strange to be packing again so soon," Nora commented as she carefully folded her clothes and placed them in her trunk. "I never imagined when I arrived here a month ago that I'd be leaving under such different circumstances." Ross, who had been helping to move the heavier items to the wagon, paused in the doorway of the small bedroom. "Any regrets?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. "None," she replied firmly, "though I do wonder what my father would think of all this." "He'd be pleased, I think," Ross said. "He always treated me with respect, even when I was just starting as a ranch hand, and he told me once that he hoped I'd find a good woman to settle down with someday." "Did he?" Nora asked, surprised and touched. "He did. It was during that cattle drive to Cheyenne 2 years before he fell ill, said I reminded him of himself at my age." The thought warmed Nora's heart. Her father had been a good man, hardworking and honest. If he had seen those qualities in Ross, it was yet another confirmation that she was making the right choice. With her belongings loaded into the wagon, they made their final stop at the general store to purchase supplies from Mrs. Abernathy's list. The storekeeper, Mr. Hoffman, raised an eyebrow when he saw them enter together. "Miss Hamilton," he greeted her. "Heard you were leaving town today." "Plans change, Mr. Hoffman," she replied with a smile. "I've decided to stay in Moab after all." His eyes darted between her and Ross, putting the pieces together. "I see," he said, nodding slowly. "Well, that's good news for our community. Your mother's apple preserves were the highlight of the Harvest Festival every year." As they selected items from the shelves, flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples, Nora became aware of the curious glances from other customers. News traveled fast in a small town like Moab, and by nightfall, everyone would know that Nora Hamilton had not only stayed but was living at the old Hamilton Ranch with Ross Whitaker, albeit with Mrs. Abernathy as chaperone. "People will talk," she murmured to Ross as they waited for Mr. Hoffman to total their purchases. "Let them," he replied, unconcerned. "We've done nothing wrong, and Mrs. Abernathy's presence ensures propriety is maintained. Even so, there will be speculation about our intentions." Ross turned to face her fully, his expression earnest. "I've been clear about my intentions, Nora. I love you, and I hope that one day you'll consent to be my wife, but I won't rush you, and I won't allow gossip to force our hand." His forthright declaration, spoken quietly but with conviction in the middle of the general store, sent a rush of warmth through her. "I appreciate that, Ross," she said softly, "though I don't think it will take me very long to know my own mind on the matter." The ride back to the ranch was companionable, with the wagon loaded with Nora's trunk and the supplies they'd purchased. The sun was high overhead, baking the desert landscape and making the shade of the cottonwoods along the creek a welcome sight as they approached the property. "I was thinking," Ross said as they turned onto the lane leading to the house, "that we might host a small gathering soon. Nothing elaborate, just a dinner for some of our neighbors. It would be a way to announce your return to the community and establish our situation." "That's a wonderful idea," Nora agreed, seeing the wisdom in the suggestion. "Mrs. Abernathy would enjoy the planning, I'm sure, and it would give me a chance to reconnect with people I've missed." As they pulled up to the house, Ethan Calloway approached from the direction of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Got those fence posts set in the north pasture," he reported to Ross. "Will's still out there finishing up the wire." "Good work," Ross nodded. "Any sign of those strays we were missing?" "Found too near the creek. No sign of the others yet, but Will's keeping an eye out." Ross turned to Nora. 3 calves wandered off yesterday. Nothing unusual, but with mountain lions in the area, we need to find them quickly." The casual inclusion in ranch business made Nora smile inwardly. It was as if Ross already considered her a partner in the operation, not just a guest or even a future wife. It was a respect she had always valued in him, even before romantic feelings had developed. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity. Nora's belongings were carried to her room, and she spent time arranging them to her satisfaction. Mrs. Abernathy put her to work in the kitchen, and together they prepared a hearty stew for supper, with fresh bread baking in the oven. The evening meal was again a lively affair, with the Calloway brothers sharing tales of their travels before coming to work for Ross. Will, the younger and more talkative of the two, had a gift for storytelling that kept them laughing. "So there I was," he recounted, gesturing with his fork, "standing in the middle of this creek, my boots filled with water, my hat floating downstream, and this rancher's daughter watching from the bank, laughing fit to burst." "What did you do, Mrs. Abernathy asked, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "Only thing a man could do," Will replied with a grin. "I bowed like I was at a fancy ball, scooped up a handful of mud, and presented it to her like a bouquet. She laughed so hard she fell right in beside me." "And that," Ethan added dryly, "is why we had to leave Wyoming in such a hurry." Her father didn't appreciate Will's sense of humor. This prompted another round of laughter, and Nora found herself relaxing completely for the first time in longer than she could remember. The kitchen, warm with cooking and companionship, felt like the heart of a home again, her home. Later, after the brothers had retired to the bunkhouse and Mrs. Abernathy had gone to bed, Nora and Ross sat on the porch swing in the cool evening air. The stars were emerging in the vast desert sky, brilliant pinpoints of light in the darkness. "It's been a good day," Ross said, his voice low and content. "Having you here, it makes this place feel complete." "It feels right," Nora agreed, leaning slightly against his shoulder. "As if this is how things were meant to be all along." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, the only sound the gentle creaking of the swing and the distant chorus of night creatures. "Ross," Nora said eventually, "when you imagined buying my father's ranch and bringing me back here, what future did you see for us?" He considered the question, taking his time to answer. "I saw us building something together, not just a successful ranch, but a home, a family, eventually, children running in those fields, climbing the apple trees." He paused, then added softly, "I saw us growing old on this porch, watching the seasons change, year after year." The simple beauty of his vision brought tears to Nora's eyes. It was everything she had ever wanted but had forced herself to abandon when circumstances had seemed to make it impossible. "I want that too," she whispered. "All of it." Ross turned to her in the darkness, his hand finding hers on the seat between them. "Then we'll make it happen together." The conviction in his voice, the warmth of his hand on hers, the promise of the future stretching before them, it all combined to create a moment of perfect certainty. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. As the evening deepened into night, Nora knew with absolute clarity that she had made the right decision when she had watched that stagecoach pull away without her. Her journey wasn't taking her to San Francisco after all. It was bringing her home to the place and the man she had loved all along. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar to Nora. Each day brought its own set of tasks: household management, garden tending, assistance with the lighter ranch work, and each evening brought the satisfaction of a day well spent. True to his word, Ross courted her properly. On Saturdays, he would finish his work early, clean up with particular care, and escort her and Mrs. Abernathy to town for shopping and socializing. They attended church together on Sundays, sitting side by side in the pew that had once belonged to Nora's family. The dinner party they had discussed was planned for the third weekend after Nora's return. Invitations were sent to a dozen of their closest neighbors, including families that had known both the Hamiltons and the Whitakers for generations. "Nothing fancy," Mrs. Abernathy advised as they planned the menu. "These are ranch folks. Good, simple food is what they'll appreciate." Nora agreed, and they settled on roast beef, potatoes, fresh vegetables from their garden, and of course, apple pie made with the first of the season's fruit from the orchard. The trees had produced well despite the neglect, and Nora had spent several days harvesting with help from Will Calloway, who proved to be adept at reaching the highest branches. The evening of the gathering arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage across the property. Ross and the Calloway brothers had spent the afternoon preparing the yard, setting up tables under the cottonwood trees, stringing lanterns for when darkness fell, and even constructing a small platform that puzzled Nora until Will brought out his fiddle. "Dancing," Ross explained when she asked. "Can't have a proper gathering without a bit of dancing." The guests began arriving as the sun dipped toward the horizon, bringing covered dishes to complement the main fare. The Petersons, the Millers, the Johnsons, and other families that formed the backbone of the community around Moab all welcomed Nora back with genuine warmth. "We were so sorry to hear you were leaving," Mary Peterson, soon to be Mary Miller, told her as they arranged flowers on the outdoor tables. "Mother said it was a shame, with you being such a part of this community." "It all worked out for the best," Nora replied with a smile, catching Ross's eye across the yard where he was deep in conversation with Mary's father about cattle prices. As darkness fell and the lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the gathering, Mrs. Abernathy announced that dinner was ready. The food was laid out on long tables, and everyone filled their plates before finding seats at the smaller tables arranged beneath the trees. Ross, after ensuring everyone was served, tapped his glass with a fork to gain attention. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his deep voice carrying easily in the evening air. "Many of you have known me since I was a boy, working alongside my father on the Whitaker ranch. You watched me learn the trade, make my mistakes, and eventually strike out on my own." He paused, looking around at the gathered faces. "When the opportunity came to purchase the Hamilton ranch, I knew it was more than just a business decision. This land has history not just for the Hamilton family, but for our entire community. I'm committed to honoring that history while building for the future." His gaze found Nora, sitting with Mrs. Abernathy and the Peterson women. "And I'm deeply grateful that Miss Hamilton has agreed to stay in Moab and help me restore this ranch to its former glory. Her knowledge of the land and her skills, especially with those famous apple trees, are invaluable." A murmur of approval ran through the group, and Mr. Peterson called out, "Hear, hear! No one makes apple preserves like a Hamilton." Laughter rippled through the gathering, and Nora felt herself blush with pleasure at the genuine affection in the comment. Ross raised his glass. "To good neighbors, good land, and the blessings of community." "Hear, hear!" The toast was echoed around the tables, and conversation resumed with renewed vigor. As the meal progressed, Nora found herself moving from table to table, reconnecting with people she had known her entire life, but had somewhat withdrawn from during her period of mourning for her father. Their acceptance and obvious pleasure at her decision to remain in Moab further confirmed that she had made the right choice. After the dessert, her apple pie, which drew the expected compliments while Calloway took up his position on the small platform with his fiddle. He was joined by Mr. Johnson with a harmonica and young Tom Peterson with a guitar. "Ladies and gentlemen," Will announced with a flourish of his bow, "find your partners for a good old-fashioned country reel." Ross appeared at Nora's side, his hand extended in invitation. "Miss Hamilton, may I have the honor?" With a smile, she placed her hand in his. "You may, Mr. Whitaker." The impromptu band struck up a lively tune, and soon the cleared area near the platform was filled with dancing couples. Ross led Nora through the steps with unexpected grace for a man who spent most of his days on horseback. "You dance well," she commented as they turned together in the pattern of the reel. "My mother insisted," he replied with a grin. "Said no son of hers would embarrass her at social functions by clomping around like a plow horse." The image of a young Ross being taught to dance by his stern but loving mother made Nora laugh. "She taught you well." "She'd be pleased to see me putting her lessons to use," he said, a hint of wistfulness in his tone. Ross's mother had passed away 5 years earlier, followed by his father just 2 years later, leaving him alone in the world except for a brother who had moved to California. "I think she'd be pleased by a lot of what you've accomplished," Nora replied softly. The music shifted to a waltz, and Ross drew her closer, his hand warm at her waist. Under the golden glow of the lanterns, with their neighbors looking on approvingly, they moved together in perfect harmony. As the evening progressed, Nora danced with several of the men present. Mr. Peterson, who had been friends with her father, Tom Peterson, now a lanky young man of 18, and even Ethan Calloway, who proved to be surprisingly light on his feet despite his taciturn nature. But it was always to Ross that her eyes returned, watching as he partnered Mrs. Abernathy for a reel or Mary Peterson for a Scottish. There was a rightness to seeing him here, on her family's land, building relationships with their neighbors and creating a place for himself for them in the community. The party continued until the late hours, with stories being shared around the tables and occasional bursts of laughter punctuating the night air. It was well past midnight when the last guests departed, leaving behind warm wishes and invitations for future gatherings. "That went well, Mrs. Abernathy declared as they began the cleanup, despite Ross's insistence that it could wait until morning. "I haven't seen some of those old-timers dance in years." "It was perfect," Nora agreed, gathering plates from one of the tables. "Just the right balance of formality and comfort." "And did you notice," the older woman added with a meaningful look, "how everyone simply accepted you two as a pair? No raised eyebrows, no whispered comments, just natural acceptance." Ross, returning from escorting the Johnsons to their wagon, overheard the comment. "That's the benefit of a lifetime of building trust," he said. "People know we're honorable, so they assume our intentions are as well." The Calloway brothers had already retired to the bunkhouse, and after helping with the essential cleanup, Mrs. Abernathy announced that she too was ready for bed. "Don't stay up too late, you two," she advised with a yawn. "And remember, I may be tired, but I'm not deaf." Her pointed reminder of her role as chaperone made Nora smile. "We'll just be a few more minutes, Mrs. Abernathy. Rest well." Once the older woman had gone inside, Ross and Nora continued gathering the last of the dishes, working together in companionable silence. The lanterns had been extinguished except for two that provided just enough light to see by. "I meant what I said earlier," Ross commented as they stacked the final plates. "About being grateful you stayed. These past weeks have been the happiest of my life." Nora set down the stack of dishes and turned to face him fully. "Mine too, Ross, and not just because I'm back on my family's land. Because I'm here with you." He stepped closer, the lantern light casting half his face in golden warmth, the other half in shadow. "Nora Hamilton," he said, his voice low and serious, "I've been trying to find the perfect moment, the perfect words, but maybe there's no such thing. Maybe the right time is simply when it feels impossible to wait any longer." Her heart began to race as he took her hand in his. "Ross, I love you," he said simply. "I think I have since we were children, though I didn't have the wisdom to recognize it then. These past weeks have only confirmed what I already knew when I rode to stop that stagecoach, that a life without you would be only half a life at all." He lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hand, and reached into his pocket with the other. "I'm asking you properly now, with no rush or pressure from circumstances. Nora Hamilton, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" The ring he held out caught the lantern light, a simple gold band with a small, perfect diamond at its center. It wasn't elaborate or ostentatious, but it was exactly right, exactly what she would have chosen herself. "Yes," she whispered, tears of joy making the lantern light blur and shimmer. "Yes, Ross Whitaker, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit as if made for her, and then rose to his feet. With infinite tenderness, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her their first kiss, sweet and full of promise. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Ross rested his forehead against hers. "I've been carrying that ring for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment." "This was perfect," Nora assured him, her hands resting lightly on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. "Under the stars, on this land that means so much to both of us, after a night spent with friends and neighbors." They stood together in the gentle night, surrounded by the sounds of the desert and the scent of sage, two people who had found their way home to each other against all odds. "When?" Ross asked after a while, his arm around her waist as they gazed up at the star-filled sky. "When what? When shall we be married?" he clarified, a smile in his voice. "I'd say tomorrow, but I suspect Mrs. Abernathy would have strong opinions about proper planning." Nora laughed softly. "She certainly would, and there are preparations to be made, announcements to send." She considered for a moment. "After the harvest, perhaps, when the apples are in and the preserves are made. Late September." "September," Ross agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That gives us 2 months to prepare, and then a lifetime to be together." A lifetime. The words filled Nora with a deep, abiding joy, a lifetime of mornings waking beside Ross, of working together on this land they both loved, of building a family and a legacy. It was everything she had ever wanted, everything she had thought lost when her father died and the bank foreclosed on their property. "I should go in," she said reluctantly, aware that propriety still demanded certain boundaries until they were wed. "Mrs. Abernathy will be wondering what's keeping us." "Of course," Ross agreed, though he seemed equally reluctant to end the moment. He walked her to the door where they shared one more kiss, brief but full of emotion, before she slipped inside. Mrs. Abernathy was waiting in the kitchen, a knowing look on her face as she took in Nora's flushed cheeks and the new ring sparkling on her left hand. "Well," the older woman said with satisfaction, "it's about time. Congratulations, my dear." "Thank you," Nora replied, unable to contain her smile. We're thinking September after the harvest. A perfect time for a wedding, Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly, and it gives us just enough time to prepare properly. Now, off to bed with you. We have planning to do tomorrow. As Nora lay in her bed that night, watching moonlight filter through the curtains, she reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. 1 month ago, she had been preparing to leave Moab forever, believing that happiness and fulfillment awaited her elsewhere. Now, she knew the truth that everything she had ever wanted had been here all along, waiting for her to find her way back to it. The September wedding of Ross Whitaker and Nora Hamilton became the social event of the season in Moab. Held in the town church with a reception afterward at the ranch, it drew guests from as far away as Green River and even Salt Lake City, where Ross's brother Nicholas traveled from with his wife and children. The months leading up to the ceremony had been busy ones on the ranch. The apple harvest was abundant, keeping Nora and Mrs. Abernathy, who had agreed to stay on as housekeeper after the wedding, occupied with preserving and baking. Ross and the Calloway brothers expanded the cattle herd, purchasing additional breeding stock from a renowned rancher in Wyoming. Improvements to the house continued as well. A new bedroom suite was added, providing more privacy for the soon-to-be married couple, and the kitchen was expanded to accommodate Nora's cooking and preserving activities. The orchard received careful attention, with damaged trees removed and new saplings planted to ensure its future productivity. Through it all, Ross courted Nora with unwavering devotion. There were picnics by the creek, rides to scenic overlooks in the surrounding desert, and Saturday evenings spent on the porch swing, planning their future together. Their love deepened with each passing day, built on a foundation of shared history, mutual respect, and genuine affection. On the morning of her wedding day, Nora stood in her bedroom, gazing out the window at the land that had been her family's for generations. The desert was beginning to show hints of autumn, with a subtle shift in the quality of light and a crispness to the morning air. A knock at the door preceded Mrs. Abernathy's entrance, carrying a package wrapped in tissue paper. "A delivery for you, my dear, from your groom." Curious, Nora unwrapped the package to find a small wooden box beautifully crafted from what appeared to be apple wood. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a delicate gold locket, similar in design to the one that had belonged to her mother but clearly new. A note in Ross's bold handwriting accompanied it. "For new memories to accompany the treasured ones you carry. With all my love, Ross." Tears welled in Nora's eyes as she lifted the locket from its bed. It was perfect, a thoughtful acknowledgement of her past and a promise for their future together. "That man," Mrs. Abernathy said softly, helping Nora fasten the locket around her neck. "He understands what matters to you." "He does," Nora agreed, touching the locket that now hung beside her mother's. "He always has." Her wedding dress was a creation of ivory silk, ordered from a dressmaker in Salt Lake City. Simple yet elegant, with a modest train and delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, it complemented her slender figure perfectly. Her hair was arranged in a coronet of braids, adorned with small white flowers from the garden. The church was filled to capacity when Nora arrived, accompanied by Mr. Peterson, who had agreed to give her away in her father's absence. As the organ began to play and the congregation rose to its feet, she took a deep breath and began the walk down the aisle to where Ross waited. He stood tall and proud in a new black suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved. But it was his expression that caught and held her attention, the look of absolute wonder and devotion as he watched her approach. In that moment, all her remaining doubts or fears vanished, replaced by the certainty that this man would love and cherish her all the days of their lives. The ceremony was traditional and moving, with vows exchanged in clear, steady voices and rings blessed by the minister before being placed on their respective fingers. Ross's ring for Nora was a perfect match to her engagement band, while the one she placed on his finger was a simple gold band inscribed with their initials and wedding date. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared to the assembled guests. "Mr. Whitaker, you may kiss your bride." Their first kiss as a married couple was brief but tender, mindful of their audience yet suffused with the promise of deeper intimacy to come. As they turned to face the congregation, hands clasped tightly together, the church erupted in applause. The reception at the ranch was a joyous celebration that lasted well into the evening. Tables were set up beneath the cottonwood trees, now beginning to turn golden with autumn's approach. The wedding feast featured the best of local produce, including lamb from the Johnson Ranch, vegetables from various neighbors' gardens, and of course, Nora's famous apple pie for dessert. Will Calloway and his fellow musicians provided music for dancing, and as the sun began to set, lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the celebration. Ross and Nora opened the dancing with a waltz, moving together with the easy grace of two people perfectly attuned to each other. "Happy, Mrs. Whitaker," Ross murmured as they circled the improvised dance floor. "Completely," she replied, savoring the sound of her new name, "though I still can't quite believe all that's happened since that morning at the Stagecoach depot." "I think about that day often," he admitted. "How close I came to losing you forever if I'd been even an hour later." "But you weren't," she reminded him, squeezing his hand. "You arrived exactly when you needed to, and I made the choice to stay." "The best choice either of us ever made," Ross said, pulling her a fraction closer as they continued to dance beneath the stars. As the evening progressed, they followed the wedding traditions, cutting the cake together, receiving gifts and well wishes from their guests, and eventually changing into traveling clothes for their departure. Ross had arranged for a week-long honeymoon stay at a hotel in Salt Lake City, a rare luxury for the hard-working rancher. Their departure was accompanied by the traditional shower of rice and cheers from their guests. Ross helped Nora into the waiting buggy, which had been decorated with flowers and ribbons by the Calloway brothers, before taking the reins himself. "Ready?" he asked, his voice low and intimate in the gathering darkness. "Ready," she confirmed, her hand finding his on the seat between them. With a final wave to their friends and neighbors, they set off down the lane, husband and wife at last, bound for a future as bright and promising as the stars overhead. The honeymoon in Salt Lake City was a time of discovery and deepening connection. Away from the responsibilities of the ranch, Ross and Nora explored the city, attended theatrical performances, and enjoyed the luxury of having meals prepared for them. But the most precious moments were the quiet ones, conversations that lasted late into the night, shared laughter over private jokes, and the intimacy of learning each other as husband and wife. Their return to the ranch brought them back to the rhythms of rural life, but now as true partners in every sense. The fall cattle roundup kept Ross and the ranch hands busy, while Nora settled into her role as mistress of the household, managing domestic affairs with the same efficiency her mother had once shown. Mrs. Abernathy, true to her word, stayed on as housekeeper, occupying a comfortable room off the kitchen. Her presence was a blessing, especially as the holiday season approached and preparations for winter began in earnest. As Christmas drew near, Moab experienced an unusual cold snap, with temperatures dropping well below freezing at night. Snow, rare in the desert landscape, dusted the distant mountains and occasionally reached the valley floor. "We should bring those younger calves into the barn," Ross commented one evening as they sat at the kitchen table after dinner, reviewing the ranch accounts. "This cold is harder on them than the older stock." "Do we have enough space?" Nora asked, concerned for the animals' welfare. "We'll make it work," he assured her. "Ethan and Will are already preparing extra pens. We should be able to shelter the most vulnerable until this weather passes." Their first Christmas as a married couple was a festive affair, with the house decorated with evergreen boughs brought down from the mountains and candles in every window. Gifts were exchanged on Christmas morning, practical items mostly, with a few personal treasures. Ross presented Nora with a set of leather-bound journals for recording her orchard observations and recipes, while she gave him a fine new saddle blanket she had worked on secretly for weeks. As winter gave way to spring, the ranch flourished under their joint management. The cattle thrived, the apple trees bloomed with promise, and the household ran smoothly. But the greatest joy came with Nora's announcement in late April that they were expecting their first child. "A baby," Ross repeated when she told him, his expression transforming from surprise to wonder to pure joy in the span of seconds. "We're having a baby, due in November according to Mrs. Abernathy's calculations," Nora confirmed, her own happiness reflected in her smile. Just after harvest, when things quiet down a bit, Ross gathered her gently in his arms, mindful of her condition though there was no visible sign yet. "I love you, Nora Whitaker," he whispered against her hair, "more than I ever thought possible." The pregnancy progressed well through the spring and summer months. Nora remained active, though she gradually delegated more of the physically demanding orchard work to Will, who had shown a particular aptitude for it. The young ranch hand had become almost like a younger brother to them, both, his cheerful nature and willingness to learn making him an invaluable member of their household. In late August, as Nora entered her 6th month, Ross's brother Nicholas arrived for an extended visit with his wife, Eleanor, and their 2 children, 8-year-old Michael and 6-year-old Rebecca. The cousins had maintained regular correspondence but had not seen each other since the wedding, and the reunion was a joyous one. "You look radiant," Eleanor told Nora as they sat in the shade of the porch, watching the children explore the ranch under Ross and Nicholas's supervision. "Pregnancy suits you?" "I've been fortunate," Nora acknowledged, her hand resting on her growing belly. "No serious discomfort, just the usual tiredness." "And how is my brother as an expectant father?" Eleanor asked with a knowing smile. "Overprotective, I imagine," Nora laughed. "He tries not to be, but yes, he would wrap me in cotton wool if I allowed it." "Nicholas was the same," Eleanor confided. "With Michael, he wouldn't let me lift so much as a teacup without rushing to assist. By the time Rebecca came along, he'd relaxed somewhat." The visit extended through the apple harvest, with Nicholas and his family pitching in to help. Michael and Rebecca delighted in picking the lower branches, competing to see who could fill their baskets first. Eleanor proved to be an expert at making cider, a skill she had learned from her own mother in New York. The combined families worked together in a harmony that made the labor feel more like celebration than toil. In the evenings, they gathered on the porch or around the fireplace on cooler nights, sharing stories and building connections that would last a lifetime. "This is what I always wanted," Ross commented to Nora one night as they prepared for bed, the house quiet after their guests had retired. "Not just the ranch or the success of it, but this family, connection, belonging. It's what I wanted too," Nora replied, moving into his embrace. "Even when I was boarding that stagecoach, I think part of me was hoping for a reason to stay." "Thank God I found the courage to give you that reason," Ross murmured, his hand gently caressing the swell of their unborn child. "When I think of how close we came to missing all of this." "But we didn't miss it," Nora reminded him, placing her hand over his. "We're exactly where we're meant to be, together." As September gave way to October, Nicholas and his family reluctantly prepared to return to California. The children had grown especially attached to the ranch life and begged to stay longer. "You'll come back in the spring," Ross promised his niece and nephew as they said their goodbyes. "And by then, you'll have a new cousin to meet. We'll name the baby after you if it's a boy," Nora added, embracing Eleanor warmly. "Nicholas Ross Whitaker has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" The gesture clearly touched both Nicholas and Eleanor, cementing the bond between the brothers and their families. As the buggy carrying their relatives disappeared down the lane, Ross put his arm around Nora's shoulders. "They'll be back," he said with certainty. "This place has a way of drawing people home." The weeks following their departure were busy ones, as final preparations were made for both the coming winter and the baby's arrival. A nursery was set up in the room adjoining their bedroom, painted a cheerful yellow, and furnished with a cradle that Ross crafted himself from apple wood. November arrived with unusually mild weather, the desert autumn extending its golden warmth well past the usual time. Nora, now in her final days of pregnancy, moved more slowly but remained determined to oversee the household preparations for winter. "You should rest more," Ross urged as he found her in the pantry, taking inventory of the preserves and canned goods that would sustain them through the colder months. "I'm fine," she assured him, though she accepted his arm as they walked back to the kitchen. The baby isn't due for another week, according to Mrs. Abernathy's calculations. But nature had its own timetable, and that very night, Nora woke to the unmistakable pains of labor beginning. By morning, Mrs. Abernathy had taken charge of the birthing room, sending Ross to fetch the midwife from town. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and as the sun began to set on a clear November evening, Nicholas James Whitaker made his entrance into the world with a lusty cry that announced his healthy lungs to everyone within earshot. "A son," the midwife announced to Ross, who had been pacing the hallway for hours. "A fine, strong boy." When he was finally allowed to enter the bedroom, Ross found Nora propped up against pillows, tired but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Come meet your son," she said softly, her eyes shining with tears of joy. Ross approached the bed with reverence, sitting carefully beside his wife and peering at the tiny face of their child. The baby had a shock of dark hair like his father's, and when he briefly opened his eyes, revealed the deep blue common to all newborns. "He's perfect," Ross whispered, gently touching the infant's tiny hand. To his wonder, the baby's fingers curled reflexively around his own. Strong grip. "He'll make a fine rancher someday, or whatever he chooses to be," Nora amended with a smile. "Welcome to the world, Nicholas James. You are so very loved." The first winter of their son's life passed in a blur of nighttime feedings, daily discoveries, and the deep contentment that comes with watching a family grow and thrive. Nicholas called Nick by everyone except his great-aunt Abernathy, who insisted on his proper name, was an alert, good-natured baby who rarely fussed without cause. Ross proved to be an attentive father, as willing to change a diaper or walk a colicky baby as he was to manage the ranch. The Calloway brothers, initially awkward around the infant, soon became honorary uncles, bringing small gifts and volunteering to watch him when Nora needed a break. As Nick grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered along with him. The cattle herd expanded, the orchard produced record harvests, and their reputation for quality spread throughout the territory. Ross was invited to join the Territorial Agricultural Board, a position that required occasional travel but brought valuable connections and information. By the time Nick was 3, Nora was expecting their second child. This pregnancy was more challenging than the first, with bouts of illness that lasted well beyond the early months. Mrs. Abernathy and Will's wife, Sarah, a local girl he had courted and married the previous year, stepped in to help with household duties and caring for Nick when Nora needed rest. In the spring of 1884, Abigail Rose Whitaker joined the family, a delicate beauty with her mother's honey-brown hair and a temperament that proved to be anything but delicate as she grew. From her earliest days, she showed a determination that both amused and occasionally exasperated her parents. "She's like you," Ross commented to Nora one evening as they watched 4-year-old Nick patiently building a structure with wooden blocks while his sister, at 13 months, systematically destroyed his creations. "That same quiet stubbornness." "I prefer to call it persistence," Nora replied with a laugh. "And yes, I see myself in her. Poor Nick has the patience of a saint." "He's a peacemaker," Ross agreed. "Likes to keep everyone happy. That will serve him well in life." The family continued to grow and evolve over the years. A third child, Samuel Thomas, arrived in 1886, completing their family. Each child developed distinct personalities and interests. Nick showed an early aptitude for numbers and planning, Abigail was drawn to animals and the outdoors, while Samuel revealed a creative streak that manifested in storytelling and drawing. The Hamilton Whitaker Ranch, as it came to be known, flourished under their stewardship. By the time their children were in school, it had become one of the most successful operations in the region, known for its quality cattle, exceptional apple products, and the integrity of its owners. Life wasn't without its challenges. There were droughts that tested their resources, economic downturns that affected cattle prices, and the usual array of illnesses, accidents, and disagreements that are part of any family's story. But through it all, Ross and Nora faced each challenge together, their partnership strengthened by mutual respect and unwavering love. As the 19th century drew to a close, bringing with it the promise and uncertainty of a new era, Nora often reflected on the fateful day when she had nearly boarded that stagecoach to a different life. Standing on the porch of the home they had built together, watching her husband and children work in the orchard Nick, now 20, showing 16-year-old Abigail and 14-year-old Samuel the proper pruning technique, she felt a profound gratitude for the path her life had taken. Ross, sensing her gaze, looked up from his work and smiled the same smile that had captured her heart all those years ago. He set down his pruning shears and walked toward the house, his stride still vigorous despite the gray now threading through his dark hair. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Whitaker," he said as he joined her on the porch, slipping an arm around her waist. "I was just thinking about how fortunate we've been," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "How one moment, one decision changed everything." "The best decision either of us ever made," Ross said, echoing words he had spoken on their wedding day. "I thank God every day that I caught that stagecoach in time, and I thank God I had the courage to stay," Nora added softly. Together, they watched their children continue the work they had begun, tending the land and legacy that would sustain generations to come. The stagecoach that might have carried Nora away from Moab was long forgotten, a relic of a past that never came to be. Instead, she had remained where she belonged with the man she loved, on the land that had always been her home. And in that decision to stay, Nora Hamilton Whitaker had found not just love, but the fulfillment of all her deepest hopes and dreams, a life rich in purpose, family, and the quiet joy of building something meaningful and lasting with the man who had been brave enough to ask her to remain.